So good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. This is Monday Live, something we do every Monday at 3 o'clock to figure out the future of smart buildings. As a reminder, the panelists are on mondaylive.org listed there. Most important thing here is that views expressed during this show are personal, not of any company or organization. And please do use the Q&A and chat on Zoom on the tools, and also that this slide deck will also be available on mondaylive.org if you have any links that you want to follow from it. So this week we're talking about industry collaboration. We had BCIA on the first show this week, and then BIG last week, and then we're now talking, continuing that. And this week we're going to be talking to a couple of guests from the DOE, Department of Energy, from the BTO, Building Technology Office. So we'll get to that in a moment. But before that, over to Ken. What's going on in the Ken world?
Okay, well, we've got our October issue on collaborating integration and education. That's going out well. We got an article on the magazine, Contractor Magazine collaboration, working together to achieve. I just went online last Thursday, so we're pleased with that. We've set our theme for November, which is creating clarity. And I think it'd be great if anybody can join us and bring us some clarity. I think we all need that. And as we enter this deep world of collaboration, clarification of our reach and project purpose of our projects and services is needed. And as we use tools like the open source stack, we need to find, we find that the complex can be simplified and clarified. And I think that's job number one for us as an industry. Our success depends on creating clarity and collaboratively. Another thing I wanted to just chat about is in the old days, I used to have a problem just trying to get content, and frankly, now I'm drowning in good content and trying to sort it all out and put it into some logical clarity is becoming a real problem. Automated Buildings has always been a monthly publication, and so we were gathering stuff on a monthly basis. But what's happening is things are happening daily, and stuff across my desk needs to be shared. So I've been using LinkedIn and Twitter. So please follow my social media feeds as they're coming live with great information that is shaping our monthly magazine. You can kind of watch the content evolve and help shape it, which I think is important for this clarity situation. If somebody says something that is actually blurring the picture, it's always great to pop right up in a social media response and try and clarify that. The immediacy of social media is just truly amazing to me, an old guy like me. What is hot is our lead article for October, Goodbye IT. It's just Buy IT. That has generated some 4,500 views on LinkedIn and about 48 interactions, which is kind of interesting. A follow-up post just having us join us at the Smart Building Integration Summit at Realcomm IBCon created about 1,200 views and 12 comments. It seems there's a great discussion going on about open standards like MQTT and IAP versus some of our standard protocols. And also great discussion on the OT-IT, which is always going on. And I think the answer is it depends what you're doing as to the correct solution. Anything with MQTT is well read. There's definitely a battle lines being set up and camps, I guess, being created. So interesting times for sure. Back to you, Anto.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks. And Mark, you're muted.
You're muted.
We could hear that.
Okay, all right, sorry. So this I found actually today, and it really intrigued me a lot. It's from an online group called The Conversation. The title is Get Ready for the Invasion of Smart Building Technologies Following COVID-19. So I go, all right, this is going to be good. I was getting really into the article, but then they hit me and really got me to thinking. So within the article, they brought up, should we blindly trust those who control smart building technology to have the well-being and best interest of the building occupants at heart? It really got me thinking, and I hope it does for the rest of the group as well. Then they went on a brief little statement. Conversely, if you tend to doubt big tech's goodwill towards mankind, one word should spring to mind: control. And then ultimately, it led to all of this stuff we are all doing, and we've had conversations, and of course it's the nature of privacy and all this, but the last in this article was a regime of property rights in commercial buildings, including those pertaining to the digital space, should be enacted so these rights can be shared among all stakeholders. So just, again, just kind of thought-provoking thinking for me is, what stance would I take? I'm not going to say, I don't know yet, but it really got me to thinking about this whole idea of there are some people out there, when we say control, or thinking we're controlling, you know, their lives, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So anyway, food for thought. Anybody got opinions on this?
The Conversation, I'm not aware of that publication. Do you know?
I have no idea. It just hit my inbox
Okay.
today, or I found it. I have no idea.
Okay.
Just as a tangent on that, Mark, and sort of extending it a little bit, I don't know if you guys saw, there was an article just yesterday, the day before, in the UK. A judge handed down a ruling for someone who had a Nest camera, no, a Ring camera, sorry, a Ring camera on their front door, which was picking up audio from his neighbor, you know, the sensitivity, and the neighbor sued the guy, and the judge is awarding him hundreds of thousands of dollars of invasion of privacy because the Ring camera was so sensitive. So, you know, just another dimension of smart technologies, privacies, control, override, you know, type of thing.
So let's move on. Anno, back to you, I guess.
Nope, there you go. Interesting article from Cushman and Wakefield. They did a report. You can download it. It's a freebie. Predicting the return to the office. These are their kind of key findings, which was really interesting. You guys can read as much as I can talk. The key one down the bottom, they're sort of predicting, you know, most office workers globally will return through first quarter of 2022. You know, which I think is. And they did a pretty good job at looking at all the different criteria, vaccinations, you know, mandates, everything kind of going through. So interesting take, I thought.
Great, thank you. This is what I wanted to highlight. We've talked on the show about how this is impacting our industry. I think a lot of you that are involved with hardware is impacted to some degree by this. It looks like it's not quite yet getting better. So I don't know if anybody has any views on that, not just for products in our industry, but sort of society and global markets generally. So I was kind of a little bit worried.
I think this is, Anto, I think this is going to be counterintuitively one of the positives that comes out of a pandemic like this. We're going to take a second look at all these supply chains and all that, and we'll have to suffer a little bit, for sure. I get that, but I think on the other side of that, I think we'll have some new construction, new build, and some shored up supply chains. So I think there's a positive in the end. We'll just have to get to it.
And maybe a focus on local rather than global, which is.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about rates there, is that the money rates or the throughput, so to speak?
Who was talking about rates? Sorry.
Most analysts assumed rates would start to plateau.
Oh, so rates of shipping rates.
Yeah, how many packages are moving or the fees?
The cost, the fees.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is like 5 times normal or something like that.
Well, yeah, and they go hand in hand, obviously, too. So.
Yeah. So, okay, so that was it. Anybody else have any other out-of-band comments?
Yeah, had a couple of things. One, I saw a survey by Blue Sky that was suggesting that people either considering or installing, monitoring room occupancy and adjusting HVAC loads. And 30%, it was sort of a 30-30 split, where 30% were actually saying they're already ordered or doing it. This is with about 243 facility managers. Another 30% said, yeah, they're looking at it and will be going ahead, and about 30% said they weren't sure, or no, rather. So it's kind of a split at the moment, but suggests that 66% of people are either looking at or will undergo monitoring room occupancy and adjusting the HVAC loads accordingly.
Actually, to that, Roger, there's actually a conference, there's a webinar tomorrow on the future of building occupancy control as it relates to that. Can't remember who's doing it, but that I clicked into it.
Oh, no,
I'll post a link.
Yeah,
that's kind of a European
this link too. But it's
sorry, Roger. That's kind of a European strategy already, right? Yeah, room controllers and individual room.
This is occupancy. Yeah, this is tied into occupancy.
Right, but that's all part of an individual room control. We tend to control bigger zones and things here in the States, and I found doing the work in Europe that it's more room control oriented. Yeah,
doing in much smaller spaces and conference room and meeting rooms and things like that too. I'll post the link. The other thing I saw, which kind of reminded me a little, it said, it was an advert for Chevy trucks. It said more than 98% of Chevy trucks are still on the road 10 years later, and Ford it's about 97%. And I'm just thinking, if you want a reoccurring revenue or you want to keep on making money out of something, you better be in software as opposed to hardware, because once you get it, you keep it. It hardly ever changes out.
Interesting. All right, so let us move on. I'm going to bring on as panelists Maddie Saltzman and Harry Bergman. If I can do this right. And there you go. And also Melissa. So hi, Maddie. Hi, Harry. And hello, Melissa. Did that right?
Hey.
Hey, Maddie.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. So Maddie and Harry are from DOE BTO, and I'll have them introduce themselves. And Melissa is working with us in the coalition. So we really want to have a conversation about the collaboration that's going on between the coalition through Monday Live and DOE. So Maddie, if you can sort of do an intro of yourself and what you do and what BTO is all about, and then Harry follow up on that, and then Melissa can follow up, and then we can talk about the core subjects. So over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks will have to forgive if my finger comes in front here. In the perpetual technology issues, perhaps my Wi-Fi is not being great, so I'm called in on my phone. Happy to be here. My name is Madeline Saltzman. I'm with the U.S. Department of Energy's Building Technologies Office, where I manage our workforce development portfolio. So have a variety of projects ongoing to focus on how we have a diverse, large enough, skilled, fairly compensated workforce of folks that are able to do all of the work necessary to build a clean energy future in our buildings. So there's a lot of components of potential interest there, and a lot of issues that put together. I'll also mention my background is in actually residential buildings and retrofit work there. So I have more of my expertise comes from the residential building side, but Harry, who will go next, is on our commercial buildings team. And I'm also working part-time with the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy overall on our workforce development strategy. So in that scope, buildings and the building workforce is a component of the larger clean energy workforce, but really trying to focus on how we connect the dots for folks that are interested to get involved so that they have the training they need and entry-level job opportunities is really the focus there. But I'll turn it over to Harry.
Great, thank you. Hey everyone, I'm Harry Bergman. As Madeline mentioned, I'm on the commercial buildings team of the Building Technologies Office. My portfolio is really around empirical data. So starting from the series of benchmarking policies that were passed 10 to 12 years ago at this point, and moving up through the world of like building performance standards, thinking about whole building data, how we can make that more useful, easier to share, easier to analyze, and use that to drive improvements in our energy and emissions performance. Sort of zooming down a level, thinking about how we get to this vision of smart, flexible, grid integrated buildings, a critical issue emerged around interoperability. And I know that this is something that you all are looking at, but thinking about how we can create structured metadata in such a way that the devices that are already well connected through Ethernet or Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or whatever it may be, can share data and make sense of that data across different systems and end uses. So we've kicked off recently an effort around semantic interoperability and have a collaboration between DOE, NIST, and ASHRAE looking at building a consensus-based standard around that.
That's great. Thank you, Harry. Melissa, are you there? Hello, Melissa.
Sorry about that. I didn't realize I was on mute.
You're mute and your camera's not on. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Melissa Bowell, and I am in the capacity today chairing the Workforce Development Committee for the Coalition for Smarter Buildings. And I have a screen to share that can kind of facilitate some of the things that our group has been talking about, if that works for you.
Go for it. Go for it.
All right. So we have been meeting together as a group for a past couple of months just to kind of nudge forward some of the topics on how do we accelerate scale and how do we bridge the divide that we have where workforce is concerned. And if you're not planning to attend the coalition meeting, make sure that you get the presentations that we'll have for Wednesday of this week, because there'll be stats and some other specifics shared. But relative to today's conversation and what we have been working on is that there's this gap. You know, Maddie and the Building Technology Office have, done a lot of amazing things to help stimulate college programs throughout the US. And we have employers that have great jobs and, really good opportunities out there. And the opportunities are growing. The industry clearly is expecting more need. And so how do we bridge that gap? Well, one thing that we have found a lot of common language around is the topic of apprenticeship. And most people are unaware that the fastest growing apprenticeships in the United States today are technology-based apprenticeships, either in IT or biomedical technology and things like that. And so our group has kind of been collaborating to figure out what are the things that we could do as a coalition of interested parties, including the Department of Energy, but also others and other agencies and other companies. And so what we have been looking at is, when we think about apprenticeships, we know that we have the new Emerging Technology Apprenticeship Program that is coming out. It's launching in the month of November. It is an apprenticeship program that has 6 different apprenticeships specifically for our industry built on the IT platform. And we've been kind of brainstorming, how do we build awareness of that? And how do we help use that as a tool and connect organizations throughout the US? and some ideas have populated, and one of them, I really want Maddie to kind of jump in here and talk about some of these ideas. And you've got an intern and some others in your organization that have been contributing to these ideas as well, Maddie.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Melissa. And you know, I'll say there's a few high-level points that we've been thinking through here. One of which is just you know, really being able to leverage work with other federal agencies so that we are not duplicating any efforts that exist, and really leveraging standards, you know, maybe similar to what Harry's describing about in the data space, but you know, not trying to create duplicative programs or programs that run side by side to what's out there, but really leverage existing apprenticeship programs and certifications. I'll also just mention that part of DOE's real excitement around apprenticeship pathways as well is really focusing on equity and inclusion as well, that we are not, you know, we can kind of shift the standards of expecting somebody to do the full investment of their own education and learning before ever getting on the job experience, which of course just increases the barriers of folks getting to paid work, which you know, lengthens the amount of time that it takes. It also just puts the burden on the learner to figure out the whole process themselves, whereas apprenticeship can really support getting new folks into these careers and helping them learn along the way through on-the-job training opportunities that end up getting people that are fully trained to work in this space actually a lot faster, because you don't have them doing part-time work in a completely unrelated field at the same time. So we've been really excited about ways we can leverage apprenticeship opportunities. I'll say that one, just an example of a project that we funded out of the Building Technologies Office a couple of years ago is a project with Lane Community College out in Oregon to establish a building energy controls apprenticeship program that they actually just recently got approved through the Department of Labor of Oregon. And so, you know, on the one hand, there's elements that need to be coordinated at a federal level. There's also pieces that must happen locally that will come up in some of our other brainstorm slides, but you know, really trying to understand how we can integrate the learning that we want to see in building energy controls into pathways that by and large already exist and can help students move forward. Other than that, we are working on some analysis about how we can best work with the Department of Labor and understand what certifications and things already exist, and really just need to, the awareness needs to grow versus areas that new ones need to be developed. But Melissa, is there anything else on Brainstorm 1 you want to mention?
No, I think that's great. And that kind of leads to the topic. I think that your colleague that was working with you in your office said, you know, I didn't even know some of these roles existed when I was earlier in her career. And that's where the brainstorm of how do we create assets or possibly come together to create assets. And one of you talked about the military campaigns and how effective they are. Share a little bit about those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I do not know fully how we can or should leverage at this point, but I will say, you know, my big focus areas in a lot of my work are, again, we don't want to reinvent wheels. If there's other people that can teach us lessons learned and make our lives a lot easier to get this stuff done faster, that's better for everybody involved. And, you know, DOE at this moment does not have a ton of infrastructure for conducting outreach into high schools and universities and colleges nationwide. We do have some efforts that are going on, but, you know, in our brainstorms together, I've mentioned how, you know, if there's a federal agency that I think has gotten itself into every high school to really talk about recruitment pathways beyond high school learning, I think the Department of Defense has done a really fantastic job there. And if there's ways we can learn from some of the efforts that they've taken on, you know, I don't know how much the answer is just having more money to spend on it. But I think there's opportunities to learn from providing high school students in particular with pathways that are not just four-year college institutions, which we know is a very strong message students tend to hear, but can they fit various career opportunities into their pathway. So yeah, wanting to learn from the Department of Defense and the activities they've taken on here. I also want to mention, I saw in the chat, somebody mentioned IREX career maps, which I'm very excited that you mentioned, because we actually funded in a previous funding cycle, IREC to develop the Green Buildings career map, which I think is one of the ones that is being referenced there, as a resource to really better articulate to young people and people looking for new careers, what does a job look like in these spaces in green buildings? What types of education do they need? And what does their pathway look like beyond those careers? And then I'll also just say here that, you know, I've now mentioned a couple projects that we've funded, but all of the projects that we're funding, whether it's to develop educational modules or apprenticeship training programs or anything else, we want to make sure that the pieces, the knowledge that's developed in those efforts are then freely available to the public. So we'll be launching soon a resource called the Building Science Education Solution Center. I'll say we're relaunching it because it had existed a few years ago, but needs some revamping. As a resource where professors, teachers, anybody can access building science education resources and incorporate them into training modules that exist. But I'm sure there's a lot more to think about for funding and creating shared outreach assets in this space. And then I can jump right into this one, but I do want to turn it back to Melissa. But just to say that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, there's things that can happen on the federal level here. We absolutely understand that, want to be doing what we can. But a lot of this stuff is inherently local. There are some training elements that can be conducted online or virtually, and I think we've all seen those excel in the last couple of years. But as far as getting people actually into buildings to actually install sensors and monitor data and fix technology that's there, that really needs to be coordinated far more locally. So, you know, I think there's still some active questions going on here, but how can we best connect, you know, high school students in a region to training programs and apprenticeship programs in that region, to building owners and operators in that region, to really make the pathways a lot more clear to folks, that we can kind of offer resources on a national scale, but a lot of that more individualized problem solving is going to need to happen on a more localized level. But Melissa, I'll turn this back to you.
Well, and one of the things is that, you know, if anybody reads the Wall Street Journal, you just search in your articles labor, and you can see how many articles have been written just in the past month. The situation that we have as far as labor shortages in general is an issue. And so our industry really has to understand that we're competing with every other industry to find the best people, and the goals and the topics that, you know, we all talk about, whether it's interoperability, scale, you know, advancing energy priorities or conservation priorities, whatever they are, they depend on someone somewhere. And so one of the things that we were thinking here is it might even be possible to get some of the better brains in our industry to help us figure out technology methods of connecting people to opportunity, and it not just be the ways that we have done that in the past, but there might be some creative ways. But the Department of Labor has resources, and they have things that exist in every single region. And, you know, they have their own regions built and broken out. And it's just figuring out how to make these things work for our industry, and how to make sure that our industry is using and connecting with the resources that already exist. To Maddie's point, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, but if we already have an agency that's out there doing something, how can we leverage those activities for the benefit of our industry and for the goals that we all share in common? So that's really kind of what we've been talking about. We would really love some feedback and hear your thoughts on some of these questions. If you had attended those brainstorming sessions, what would you have contributed?
So thoughts or questions from anyone in the group?
So go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start out. When I kind of think through this whole thing, this ties back to apprenticeship too. The types of businesses that are operating locally, to Maddie's point, and need, which I agree with, by the way, that there needs to be a localized effort. But I think the majority of employers and even the larger companies who are operating locally, the local operations all are small businesses. And the lack of structure, resources, and so forth for a small business to take on a kind of an official or structured apprenticeship program is a little bit tricky.
Well,
So-
that's one of the exciting things, Tracy, is that in November, you'll be hearing in Ken's publication, hopefully, some information about an exciting tool that we now have as an industry. We actually have 6 registered apprenticeships that are turnkey ready. All an employer has to do is say, I want that one, that's what I need. And they have been built around the work that we do in our industry with the hope that it's nimble enough to be able to adapt to the things that are changing as technology changes and, you know, we continue to grow and evolve, which is one of the reasons why the title of the program is Emerging Technology, just to make sure that it's clear that we expect this will continue to trend.
Yeah, I like that. And if you can tie some kind of a recruitment or job, you know, you guys are talking about the DoD reaching into the schools. Well, you can't have a recruiter for controls in every city or town in America, but you can have a platform that would be tied to all of this stuff that can reach every high school student for that. So if there's some tying back to, hey, can I get a job doing this and maybe a career out of it at the same time? That seems like a smart play.
One most fundamental thing we all have to remember is the definition of apprenticeship, according to the Department of Labor, is a job. You cannot have an apprenticeship without a job. It is the same thing. But the cool thing is that because it's an apprenticeship, they can recruit in the schools for the program. It's not necessarily for one employer, but you can kind of fill a basket of apples that employers can, you know, have access to because they're interested in that type of job. Is that how you would describe it, Maddie? How would you?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And, you know, I think about a lot of these things being, how can we help aggregate and systematize certain elements here that can be more successful at reaching people who are looking for work. Because I think exactly as Melissa's slide put it, there's lots of people who are potentially interested in working in these spaces, but they don't know what the combination of, you know, training and education best fit. So yeah, I mean, we've been thinking about a lot of things that it kind of, the phrase we've been using internally is like place-based activities, where we can, you know, better connect the dots for folks. And I think one part that's really important to me is really making sure it's clear the role that buildings play in the clean energy future, because we have seen resources like one program that I find kind of inspiring in these spaces is the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, which provides a whole host of resources to help aggregate up small business demand for workers to people that are interested to have access to internships and fellowships and professional development. And I think we could think of ideas that replicate and expand out some of the success that they've seen to better drive, not every single business needs to be recruiting people individually. They just need to add themselves to the pool, and really making sure that careers in this space are showing up in those types of resources that already exist, and that we can continue to expand those.
Yeah, the takeaway phrase for me in all of this is enable small business, right? If you can do that and help them make those connections, you'll be way ahead of the game in terms of making this really kind of grow roots and take hold.
So I think we need to move on. I mean, we'll come back and have a general chit chat after that, but I want to give the floor to Harry. Can you talk about the sort of you joined the coalition meeting back in August and said a lot of really sort of interesting things with respect to interoperability, the importance of that to all of this, and the specs also.
Happy to pick up where I left off. If there are particular items that you have in mind, please flag those, and I'm happy to talk about it. I think, though, that this sort of aligns well with the idea behind workforce, right? That if we want to have smart, connected, flexible buildings, and we want to have a workforce that's able to show up and work with those technologies, we need to not be putting systems in buildings that require you to have a PhD in computer science in order to work with it. And so making the data and the data models and the information that can be gleaned from that data accessible and consistent, easy to understand is going to be critical. And one of the big things that we see in doing this type of interoperability work, and especially by creating a metadata standard, is that it does a couple of things. It makes interoperability procurable, right? You can say in a procurement process, I want to make sure that this system complies with this standard, and that is a testable thing, so that you can use technologies that you prefer, service providers that you prefer, and I think it really just opens up the market. And as far as building owners go, so much of their time goes into making these systems sort of piecemeal come together. And by having an interoperability standard that is testable and procurable, it makes a lot of that headache go away. On the other hand, it also lets you define use cases. So we're talking about this concept of semantic sufficiency, that you can go and query a supervisory layer for a building control system, let's say, or a BAS or an EMIS, and ask it, given the control points that you have and the in and out points that you have and the core pieces of equipment that you have, what sort of grid services are you able to provide? What sort of flexibility or peak load reduction are you able to provide? What sort of occupancy feedback are you able to incorporate? And then as a technician, when you show up to a building, if you know that you can run a standard set of queries against this data model, all of a sudden your ability to work with this building really increases dramatically. So we think that's something that's really powerful as well. So we are still a bit in the early days of this. A lot of it is going through the ASHRAE 223 committee. So this is under the BACnet standard. But the idea is that it is a consensus-built standard around structured metadata. And we're just trying to make sure that we have a lot of implementation examples and guidance to back that up. So as we're building out this metadata standard, we're testing it on a lot of our own buildings across the national labs. And we're always looking for industry partners as well to test how this actually works, right? When the rubber hits the road. What does it take? What kind of supportive software and tooling do you need to have to be able to interact with these types of data models? So that at a high level is sort of where we're going with a lot of this work. We think it's really critical to reaching this vision of a smart and connected future. Anto, is that sort of everything that you wanted me to cover? Or if there are particular things?
That's very much along the lines of what we talked about. Obviously, you're aware one of the things that we're doing is working on trying to specify the interoperability component. Could you speak to that sort of ambition, as it were?
Yeah, so I think I need to be more familiar with 2525 and what you all are working on, but it seems really comprehensive. And I think what we are doing is a small piece of that, right? And I think it's a complementary effort. We certainly want this to be technology agnostic, platform agnostic, and be able to work with whatever sort of interoperability spec is out there. I think from where we're starting, it's a very commercial building centric approach. But we want compatibility across residential systems. Connected Home over IP is doing a lot of this work, and so we've been following along what they're working on. And the idea is really that any sort of interoperability or connectivity specification out there, we want this metadata schema to be able to play nicely with that. You can think about things like 2030.5 that's really looking at grid level assets. And to be able to have sort of standardized mapping to this metadata schema that's representing behind the meter connectivity can be really valuable. And so I think that's a small layer of what you all are trying to tackle, but we really hope it's complementary. And I think that we are sticking with the semantic metadata layer because that is really what is in our wheelhouse through the Building Technologies Office, right? I don't think we need to look quite as much at the physical layers of connectivity that's addressed in a lot of other parts of the technology world. So we think this is our sweet spot.
So, Anto, just on the topic of workforce and what Harry's talking about, I think, his statement in the beginning was really pivotal, that you need to be able to contribute to this space without having a PhD. And, one of the challenges is that this is an increasingly complex situation. And as we bring new people in, one of the experiences that I've had at the university level is helping students who have the capability to contribute over time to think in terms of systems. And, the different types of systems that need to be involved in that. We've got workforce related projects with colleges around the US, but one that's particularly exciting right now is Georgia Tech's interest in Division 25 and trying to begin experiments to help students understand the concepts of Division 25 as it relates to building technology advancement. So, from Harry's point of view, there may be opportunity with the work that Maddie's doing and the coalition is doing and other organizations to approach interoperability concepts even through the workforce mechanisms and not just the specification mechanism.
Yeah, great point, great point.
It's interesting. I just jump in, having sat here for a year and a half now, talking about labor and some of these things. I remember a year ago saying, gosh, we have to get the market, the people to understand we're not just a bunch of wrench turners. And now it's sort of going the other way, going, gosh, we don't want people to think we're too sophisticated. Because a year ago we were saying, how are we going to get the people from Silicon Valley and all that to be interested in this vertical? And now we're saying, gosh, we don't want to be too complicated because we want to get, so it's a complicated issue, going back and forth. And I like what I'm hearing from you guys for sure, but I just want to put that into space going, wow, isn't it interesting? Wonder where we're going to end up, wrench turners, PhDs, or somewhere in the middle.
Probably
Yeah,
somewhere.
Bill, I would love to accentuate why that's so important. Because even if in this room we did some kind of analysis right now and came up with some quantitative proportions of what it should be, it'd be different tomorrow. And it'd be different for every employer in the US, to Tracy's point about small business. So a program like this has to modulate as much as we know that we have to modulate, a sequence based on the changing parameters that we're experiencing. And in order to do that, you've got to have a durable program and a durable process. So, it's not up to us to determine supply and demand. As long as we have the sequence of operations that works, then that supply and demand can be different in different places. Some people may need the Silicon Valley level and some may need, a little bit more of the hands-on. It just depends.
Oh, 100%. In fact, I like the fact that we've bumped up on both rails. We've bumped on both rails, which is going to put us right where you guys and Harry are talking about, somewhere right down in the middle. So
We have models that that we can look to that have kind of dealt with this. When I was listening to Harry talk, the first thing that ran through my mind was, are we trying to create a world that's more Twitter-like or more Google search engine-like? Right? So is it a publish and subscribe sort of a thing, or is it, I'm going to search and whoever has posted something out there, I'll be able to find that information.
Or it could be some other model that is more appropriate for our needs.
Yeah, but if you take what is encapsulated in those two platforms is a tremendous amount of sophistication, yet majority of Americans in the country can utilize one or both of those platforms, right? So how do we replicate something that results in something as easy to use as Twitter or Google search for the buildings community when it comes to grabbing data and publishing data?
But just on that, of course, Tracy, the most crucial thing to make both of those platforms work is the hashtag. I mean, that was the reason it was, that's why hashtags exist, was you didn't want to create a static database format. It had to be flexible and had to be user extensible. Hence was born hashtags, and that's why Haystack exists.
Hey,
And Mark published the link there of the press release, just to reiterate that.
Hashtags are obviously metadata, which is what Harry's talking about.
Yep.
Right, exactly.
Other thoughts or questions?
All right, Gina, what are your thoughts and questions? You're mighty quiet. One of the things that Maddie said was our goal of getting more young women in this space. And, when I entered my career in the 80s, I found this industry by accident, total accident. Nothing was intentional. So how can we accidentally attract some young women in the space from your point of view?
Well, I mean, even since I've been in here in this industry, I think that that's kind of changed a lot. I think it's just being, how do you attract more? I think that's already kind of in place a little bit. I think we've had outside of this industry, this STEM. So we've had help outside of this industry for that. But even since, I remember sometimes going to conferences and I feel like maybe there's 5 women there, and now I see a lot more. And I think that a lot of that is that it's kind of grown. The industry's grown a little bit as far as its technology, and you're seeing more women in technology. I also think that it's the change, more innovation is attracting women. So I think we just keep inviting more women into the conversation as we're doing here. That to me has changed a lot in the last few years. So is there a magic wand for all of this? I don't think so. I just think we keep doing what we're doing.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Gina.
Anto, I saw a comment a few minutes ago that mentioned the word, and I think Mark, you may have agreed with it, but there was something about the name emerging technology. Was there some discussion about what would be a better name? What's the best name for an apprenticeship program for our industry? What should it be?
Well, before we answer that, couldn't we all agree that this is a marketing issue, almost just 101? And we've talked about this whole thing.
Thank you, Bill Bain.
Yes.
As the marketing
Most
man
definitely.
here, yes, 100%. Again, my hat is off to Madeline and anyway,
Melissa.
to
Hey,
all,
it doesn't
yes,
matter.
to all you guys,
Melissa,
to Melissa, sorry.
all of us.
Sorry, I'm thinking. And when I used to be on Madison Avenue back in the day, when there was a thing called the Ad Council, where we would all get together for the greater good, for a cause or some type of effort, where the minds of Madison Avenue would contribute thoughts, ideas, promotion, marketing, whatever the case is. And I think, because obviously, I think our industry needs to try to do something like that, because there's not one company in this industry, small, medium, large, extra large, that is not going through the challenge of finding people, attracting people, so forth and so on. So that's number one. Number two, with respect to the women's side, that we want more women in our industry, I think for the most part, we have some terrific women, albeit a small group within this industry. How do we promote them to utilize, to engage and get other women interested and excited about the opportunities there are for them? And I think, again, to your point, Bill, I think it all comes down to a marketing and communication effort once you've got everything in place, which you guys seem to be doing that.
So the term emerging technologies may not be in itself an issue. It just depends on how, but maybe it needs to be looked at. It's all part of that.
I've got a couple of clarifying questions, if I could. So Maddie, when you talked about, and Melissa, when you talked about the apprenticeship program, my takeaway was it was primarily around educating people on what it is, and both from a career development standpoint. But is there any, for the small business that wants to actually employ an apprentice or put an apprentice program together, is there any financial component to this, or is the cost of the program always going to be borne by that business? Totally.
Oh, I love that question. Go ahead, Maddie.
No. You should go first on that one. I'll chime in after.
So one of the reasons why using existing agency programs that are in place is so important is because it allows small businesses to participate in those workforce funds. You know, when you look at these regions, they're buckets of money that have been dedicated to that region. And there are programs, and every state has their allocation mechanisms. They have their workforce systems. And when you're working with the Department of Labor program, that it makes a small business eligible to participate, whatever the programs are there. And that is really huge. The other thing is, because of the way the structure is, students finish these programs debt-free. They're almost always at no cost to the student or the person entering the program. And it's an employer-paid process. So there are a lot of different options available to employers. I didn't mean to, pick on Region 2, but it's just to say that the, federal government has dispersed funds to support these types of programs throughout the United States, in regions and in states. And because we're working through an official mechanism, there are supports for those employers.
Okay, can you be a little bit
Yeah.
more specific? Can you be a little more specific? So if I go out to hire somebody, I got a minimum wage as an example, or let's say I want to get more of a technical person, and I'm thinking I might be able to hire for them for $20 or $25 an hour. Is there going to be any offset from the government, or do I have to, am I bearing the cost? Because an apprenticeship program is going to cost money I'm assuming that apprentice would like to get paid in addition to learning something. They're not doing this just for the educational value, right?
Correct. And let me refer you on a commercial for attend Wednesday, because we're going to have those exact numbers and metrics and show you how it works. And we'll even have a little explainer video, that's a draft for employers, because there is an answer to that, Steve, but I don't want to dominate, the rest of the conversation by explaining the mechanics. But the bottom line is, it is extremely cost effective for the employer.
Right.
And
so then I know we're running out of time, so I got one other clarification or question really. So for high schools in particular, learning about apprenticeship programs, is the Department of Labor and the Department of Energy, are you already in communication with the guidance counselor offices, the career development planning offices? Do they even know that you've got this going on, that they in turn can share that with the students?
Yeah, great question. the answer is yes and no. So we have been in touch with various school counselor associations. A bigger problem to a lot of the space is I believe the current ratio of high school counselors to students is around 500 to 1, or the opposite, 1 to 500. So what we have been finding is that guidance counselors in maybe the most well-funded school districts have capacity to think a little bit about career planning, but most of them do not. And especially in the context of COVID, they have been stretched thin. So we have done some due diligence on our side to make sure that, you know, resources are available to them. But one thing we've been exploring more in coordination actually with the Department of Education is focusing a little bit more on STEM teacher associations, that some of those teacher groups are folks that really would like to see their students pursue STEM careers and might be able to serve a little bit more in that role. That being said, we also know teachers are really strapped for time and things. So it's been an ongoing effort on our side to figure out what types of resources are going to be most grab and go useful for them so that they can actually provide their students with something useful that they don't have to learn themselves. So active question.
Yep. Okay. I got more follow-up, but I know we're running out of time.
Well, and the good news is that Maddie and I are going to be there Wednesday, and we have lots of great stuff to share with you about the mechanics, and then some, you know, good discussion topics. Steve, you actually brought up a couple of, you know, weeks or months ago about how are you doing career counseling? And, you know, that just leads right off of what Maddie mentioned. And part of the apprenticeship program is for every single apprenticeship to have some kind of career counseling from people who do those jobs today, and to engage people throughout industry so that we can support those overburdened schools and counselors that actually know nothing about our industry. So we don't necessarily want them doing our counseling, but we want to give them some tools so that they can say, hey, watch this 2-minute YouTube video and, you know, you can learn all about it.
Thanks.
Can you send out a link to Wednesday's thing?
Yeah. So just to start to wrap this up, the Wednesday meeting that Melissa is referring to is a Wednesday meeting of a coalition that's happening in DC. And so there's a members meeting. We'll do a report out on that on next week's Monday Live. So that'll be something to look forward to. But I kind of think that we probably need to wrap up by giving Maddie and Harry from DOE BTO an opportunity of sort of telling us, you know, you see that this is a group, we're a group, we're passionate about smarts and data-driven buildings. How can we help you, and how can we help each other? If I can sort of ask both of you and just sort of you can wrap up with that response. Maddie, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure, I can. You know, I think first off, I'll just say that there's a lot of excitement in the government right now on a lot of these topics. We don't have a budget right now. The Congress still needs to figure out exactly what they're doing. So that makes our lives a little bit complicated right now, both busy in terms of trying to plan for a lot of different scenarios and drive things forward regardless. But I'll just say, you know, we don't always have bandwidth to dig in on every single conversation, but we really want to be hearing from industry on what your needs are. And if you think DOE were to put out money in certain spaces, what would be most useful to drive this industry forward? That information is always appreciated and helpful. And we're able to kind of take that in consideration, especially once we do get funding to move forward with. So I just want to put that out there.
Great. And Harry?
Yeah, I think I'll echo Maddie's point that things are a little complicated at the moment, but we have a lot of different versions of a lot of different big plans for spring. So I would say definitely stay in touch and follow along with information coming out of the Building Technologies Office. All that is to say, if you want to get involved in the technical side of this interoperability standard that we're working on, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to have you in this 223 working group. I think the more perspectives we have in there, the more valuable the ultimate standard is going to be. There are also several parallel projects that you can follow along with through DOE. One is looking at Haystack, and another is looking at Brick, and we're making sure that those are complementary to the 223 effort as well. And I think we'd want to, make sure that the same thing is happening here, that we are all trying to solve the same problem. Let's make sure that we are coordinating as we push in the same direction. So I think don't be strangers. Let me know if you want to dig into the details, and then hopefully we'll have some big things moving come spring.
Great. Thank you very much. That was really wonderful perspective from Maddie, from Harry, from Melissa. Thank you very much for helping that along. We will be back next week. Video of this will be up on YouTube tomorrow morning. And
so one quick thing before you cut us all off here. Somebody earlier asked if you could post or copy the chat. Just a quick Zoom pro tip. If you go into the chat box, hit the 3 dots in the lower right corner, there's a save chat option, which automatically downloads a text file to your computer of all of the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, didn't know that. So
great. Thank you all. Thanks, Tracy.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
See y'all.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.